Be'ez Hashem Yisborach, we begin Perek Shisha, the 6th chapter in the Rambam's Hilchas Stam and the category of the Hilchas Mezuzah in the Sefer of the Book of Love, which in this Perek we finish off the halachas of Mezuzah, specifically discussing the stipulations that are necessary to be obligated in the halacha Mezuzah. The Rambam begins halacha up regarding there's 10 conditions. Asar Tanoim Yesh B'Bayis, there's 10 Tanoim in a house. And then the one who's living there is going to be obligated last Mezuzah to make a Mezuzah. If one of these conditions are missing, the Mezuzah is exempt from putting up this scroll called the Mezuzah. And they are the room, the house has to be 4 amas squared, or yes, or more than that. Mezuzah should have 2 doorposts, a lintel, which is the beam that goes on top of the entryway. Should have a roof, should have doors. The gate has to be a height of 10 handbreadths or more. The house has to be unconsecrated. The adna has to be made for the dwelling of a person. The asal cover has to be made for a dwelling that's in a dignified manner. And the asal keva has to be made for a permanent residence. Those are the 10 stipulations to be obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah. As Rabbi goes through and details all these 10 things. Halacha Beis discusses the halacha of daled amas. If the room, the home, does not have an area of 4 amas squared, Patim in the Mezuzah is exempt from the mitzvah Mezuzah because it's not considered a bias because it's too small. And the Torah says a Mezuzah is beis sech, has to be a bias. Now, but if you have the area that you could square it, arba amas b'shava, to be exactly 4 amas by 4 amas squared. So even though it's not a perfect square, even though it's round, or it's a pentagon that's 5 corners, have to say if it had 4 sides, it just was not a square, it was a rectangle. The length was more than the width, where you don't have the width 4 amas, but the length compensates to make it, if you take the total area, it would be, if you squared it 4 by 4. So, since you have the area of 4 amas squared, it's going to be obligated in the Mezuzah. Halacha Gimel regarding the next stipulation of 2 doorposts. So, achsadra. What is achsadra? It's somewhat of a porch, but it's like an area that has 3 walls and a roof. So, although in the 4th side, which is where you enter from, there's 2 pillars. One would think maybe that's like a doorway. No, Paturim and Mezuzah is exempt from Mezuzah. Because these pillars, they're made just to support the roof. They weren't made as doorposts, and hence you don't have an entryway with 2 side posts. So too, if you have a roof without walls, it just has as many open gazebos have, where it has pillars all around on all 4 sides. Although it has the structure of a house, it's going to be exempt. But Mezuzah doesn't have doorposts, because these pillars, although technically you could say it's like a side post, they're made just to support the roof, and therefore does not qualify for the mezuzahs, which is the name of the side post, not the scroll that we say the mitzvah mezuzah, and hence it would not be obligated in the mitzvah. Halacha Daled regarding the lintel and regarding the height of the gate, of the entryway. So, but if there's a house that has doorposts on either side, and the kipo kamin keshes al shtei mezuzahs, so you have a dome that's on like a bow, like a rainbow, like a archway on the 2 side posts. Taking the place of a generic lintel, which is generally straight, is horizontal. But if you have the height, which is the other stipulation, of the side post, 10 tefachim or more, it's going to be obligated mezuzah. If it does not have a height of 10 tefachim, it's going to be exempt because you don't have a lintel. Why? Because since the height of the mezuzah are not 10 tefachim, and you're going to combine the dome that rounds out for the height of the side post, so then you're missing from the lintel. So because it can't be both, it can't be the side post and the lintel at the same time. So if it's less than that and you're arching, you have to have the height of 10, and at the same time then you're not going to be having a lintel. So that tells us actually both these halachas in this interesting case, which it can't be both, therefore would be invalid. Halacha Hey, regarding the obligation of having a roof and of having doors. So Ba'ishen li tikra, a house that does not have a roof, Patim Mezuzah exempt from Mezuzah. Let's say some of the building was roofed and some of it was not. It appears to me, says the Rambam, that if the area that is roofed of 4 amas by 4 amas was by the area of the opening of the entryway, then it's going to be obligated mezuzah. So what you do is you first put up the doors, because the doors are a prerequisite, and then you put up the mezuzahs in such a situation. Allah above, regarding that the house has to be unconsecrated. So harabais, the gate, the doorways of the Temple Mount, which is what the Beis Hamikdash was built on, halashachas, the chambers, vazagas, and the courtyards, and what the kanisias, what midrashes, and regarding shuls and study halls, she'im ben beis dira, which there's no apartment there in the shul complex. So Peturin, all these are exempt. Lefishem kodesh, because these are holy areas, and it says mezuzah beisecha, and you, the common man, not a holy house. That there's no chiv mezuzah. Beis HaKnesset shal kvarim. Now, regarding the shuls of the villages, shal urchem darim, by where they didn't have place to put up guests, they would sleep in the shul building. So chayv mezuzah, it's obligated mezuzah because it's not all consecrated. You have this regular dwelling over there. Beis HaKnesset shal krach, and so too the shuls of the cities. If it did have a dwelling place, let's say for the one in charge of the shul who would live over there, chayiv, then it would be obligated because there's a regular living quarters over there in the building. All the gates that were in the Beis Hamikdash, mezuzahs, they didn't have mezuzahs because we say because they were holy. Except for the Nikanor gate, which is the eastern gate of the Ezras Yisrael. Anything that's from within that. Why? So to Ishalishkas Parhedron, which means the room of the officer's appointment, because at one point in history they were paying their way to become the Kohen Gadol, hence it got the name of the officer of the king. But the main idea is because that chamber of the Lishkas Bahedron, it was the dwelling place of the high priest during the 7 days when they would separate him, preparing for the Avodah Yom Kippurim. And because that chamber is obligated mezuzah because there was a dwelling place over there, so then Shar Nikanor also, because that's an entryway that opens up into that area, which ultimately ends up into that innermost area where their chamber is. And as we'll see in the next halacha, that's the idea of when you have something opening into something else that is obligated mezuzah, so too the outer ways that enter into that would also be obligated. Halacha Zayin, regarding that it has to be a dwelling of a person. So Beis HaTevin, regarding a place that's designated for storing straw, and people don't live over there, or Beis HaBakar, the place of where the barn, where the animals are kept, or Beis HaEtzim, the place of where the wood is, or Beis HaTzach is the place where they store wine, oil, and similar things. They're exempt from having mezuzah on that room. It says in the pasuk, Beisecha, you should put on mezuzahs of your house. Beischa meyuchad lecha, it means a house that's designated for you, which is made for the dwelling of a person. Prat leila excludes the things which are not meant for people, or similar types of things. Regarding the barn of the cattle, but if the women sit over there, and they adorn themselves, they put on their makeup over there, and they get all adorned over there, then would be obligated mezuzah, because there is a designation for it, even though it's a barn, for the habitation of a person. Beishar, regarding the room of the gateway, which they would make a small little booth by the gateway of the courtyard where the guard would sit over there, or achsadra, which we described before, that little type of a porch, or mepesa, which also similar, it's a porch that was on the second story, which all the different apartments would open up into, or vagino, the garden, vadir, and the corral, which is where they would keep the sheep. All these are beturim in the mezuzah, are exempt from mezuzah. They're not meant, no one lives in those areas. However, if let's say the apartments that are obligated mezuzah open up into these areas, well then chayav mezuzah, then there would be obligated mezuzah, again because of this idea when you're entering into something else that ultimately enters into something else that's obligated mezuzah, that is also obligated in the mezuzah. Halacha therefore, echad shar chatzeres, whether you're talking about the gateways of the courtyards, even though it's not roofed, or whether it's the gateways of the alleyways, whether the gateways of the countries, the states and the cities. All obligated mezuzah. Why? Because the house that obligated mezuzah opened up into these areas and these into those areas, and therefore, even 10 entryways, one open to the other. Since the innermost, which is how you get there, is obligated mezuzah, all the outer ones are going to be obligated mezuzah. For this, they said, the gate that opens up from the garden to the courtyard, because, like we said, the chatzar is chay because it opens up to the bay. So going from the garden to the chatzar would be chay in the mezuzah. Halacha tes, regarding that it has to be a dwelling of dignity, and it has to be a dwelling that's permanent. So basic case, the laboratory, the bathroom, basic merchas, the bathhouse, basic tefillah, the mikvah, basic bursaki, where they do for the tanning of the hides of the animals. Okay, it's similar types of areas. Children Mezuzah are exempt from Mezuzah. It's not made for a respectable dwelling. These are areas that are has some element of filth. Sukkos chag b'chag, the hut that we use for sukkos on sukkos itself, even though that is somewhat of a permanence on sukkos. Ubayisha b'spina, or a house on the boat. Patur mezuzah, they exempt from the mezuzah. And the reason is lefisha ein masum dir is keva. They're not made for permanent dwellings. Shtei sukkah shel yitzim, the two huts of the potterers, where in the inner room they would dwell, and that's where they would store their pots. In the outer one, they would do the work and they would take it out to sell over there. So zulif and the mizu, it's one within the other. Hachatzayna patur mezuzah, Adon is exempt from mezuzah lefisha ein kvu, because it's not permanent. And the reason is because they wouldn't use it so much, they wouldn't eat and sleep over there. And it's not the same thing as a shower that opens up into another room that is obligated mezuzah. The reason for that is because by those, let's say, Beis Shar, it's a permanent dwelling by day and by night. It just is exempt. But it opens up to something else that would be chayiv. Here, it's totally lacking that element of permanence, and therefore wouldn't even be chayiv from going into another area that is obligated, which is the inner one, is obligated mezuzah, because that's where they live. Regarding the stores in the marketplaces, tourists are exempt from mezuzah because they're not permanent for dwelling; they're only for selling. And at nighttime, they're locked, and the homeowners go home. Halacha Yud. What do you do if a room or a house has many openings? Even though he's only usually uses one of the entryways to go in and go out. You have to make a mezuzah. You have to put up the scroll on every single entryway. Pesach cotton shebein bayis la'aliyah, a small opening that goes from the first floor to the second floor. Chayav mezuzah. It's obligated mezuzah. Where there's a discussion exactly what the novelty in that halacha is. Chedesh shebebayis. If there's a room in the house, even the room within the room, chayav lasses mezuzah al shar cheder pnimi. Which sounds like the chiddush is that even though in the medieval times they weren't that really, generally would be one room, but even if you have another room, you have to make a mezuzah on the gate of the inner room, and on the gate of the outer room, and the gate of the house. They're all made for dwelling, and there's a permanence to them, and therefore they're all considered as, even though one would say, let's say the inner room is where they sleep, but again, that would also be an element of coming and going, and these are all utilized, hence they would have this halacha of being chayiv in the mezuzah. Halacha Yudalef, Pesach shebein beis hamedrash, if there's an opening between the study hall, or beis haknesset, or from a shul, which either one of those are patur, but ubeisai, so there's an opening, there's a door that goes from his apartment to the beis hamedrash or the shul. So if he usually goes in and out through that opening, because it goes into a private apartment. Pesach shebein shnei batim. Now, regarding an opening that goes between two houses, so which you always put on the right side, which is the right side? These are both apartments. So you go after the hinge of the door. That is mokum shatzir nirimai, the area where you see the hinge, which is the one that the door opens into. Well, that's the one that's considered the primary room or house, and it's the right side of entering into that room that one would put up the mezuzah. Halacha is regarding the area of where we put up the mezuzah. Where do we attach the mezuzah? So it's b'toich cholol shel Pesach. It's inside the airspace of the door frame of the entryway. But tefach asamach lechutz, in the handbreadth that's closest to the outside of that doorway. In the beginning of the upper third of the height of the gateway, of the doorway. Now, if you put it up higher than that, it's valid, but as long as it has to be at least a handbreadth off, lower down than the lintel. But you have to put it on the right side of how you enter into that room. If you put it on the left side, it's invalid. An apartment that's owned by partners is obligated mezuzah. Regarding the understanding of what the mezuzah represents. The person has to be careful with the mitzvah of mezuzah. It's an obligation from everyone, tamed, and it's constant. And every time that a person will be entering and going out, he'll be encountering the unification of God's name, which is Shmoy Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is in the parchments over there, and it has God's name also on it. V'yishka Avaseh, he will call his love, V'yer Mishnaseh, wake up from his slumber, Shkiyas B'avlei Azman, and his wasting on his time, his errors and the vanities of time. There's nothing that stays forever and ever, but the knowledge of the rock of the world, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then right away he'll go back to his consciousness, and he'll go in the straight paths. The earlier sages said, whoever has tefillin on his head, with his joy on his arm, with his big day and the tzitzis on his garment, with Mezuzah and the Mezuzah on his doorway, he's presumed that he will not sin. Because he has many reminders in his life all around him. These are the malachim, the emissaries of God that save him from sinning. Shlomo says the pasuk in Tehillim, the malach of Hashem, they rest surrounding those who fear him, and they save him, says the pasuk in Tehillim.